Hey, everybody. Welcome to Ideas On. In this episode, we're talking all about all things improv, or not. Maybe it'll be about rhinos or buffalo. See what I did there? Very improv-y on my part. So just to remind everybody, I want to introduce the team. Let's just go around the horn. Olivia Allen, say hello.
Hi.
Duncan Kennedy.
Hello, world.
Jared Wells.
Salutations.
And joining us today, we are totally excited to have our collaborator and colleague, Bob Kodzis, improv master and proprietor of his wonderful consulting firm, Flight of Ideas. Bob's going to join us today to help us through thinking all about improv. Say hey, Bob.
Hey, I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Great to have you. So just to remind everybody how this works, every month, each member of the Ideas On team writes a blog, and we write it on the same topic. But as you can tell by looking, probably, it comes from four very distinctively different points of view. We don't discuss the blogs ahead of time. We all come at them from where we come at them. And then we get on the horn once a month and slice them and dice them, hopefully with you. We're beginning to build a little viewership out there, and we hope to see that grow even more. So we're going to kick this off with kind of a speed round. I kind of want everybody to take just 20 seconds and quickly reprise, where did you go this month with your improv blog? And you know what? Let's start with Duncan.
Oh, okay. So I reflected back on a previous chapter in my life when I was in a sketch comedy group in upstate New York, and we were transitioning from doing sketches to adding improv. And during the course of our learning, what I found is that good improv starts with structure. It's not as loosey-goosey as you always think it is. You need to have as others talked about with jazz, you need to agree on a time signature and a key and a tempo that can vary, but you need to have that structure, that scaffolding, and then you can pepper it in with whatever you want and some basic rules of the road, always yes and, never shut anything down. But it was really interesting for me as I got heavily involved with improv was how much structure and rules there actually are.
Very cool. And of course, that would have been the aforementioned comedy group in which you did once cover yourself in peanut butter, if I don't miss my guess.
That was actually the band, and that's next month's blog.
Okay, very good then. We'll save that for then. Olivia, where'd you go?
Sure. So this year's been weird. I basically ran with the idea that sometimes, more often than not, we have no idea what we're doing. And improv is a way to navigate that. I know improv is a way for me to navigate that. I am a college student. Half of the time I'm making things up as I go. So that's where I went.
Yes. Did anyone else, I'm just curious because it's kind of subtle. Did anyone else experience 2020 as, I don't know, a different kind of year? Or was there something specific? I don't know. I'm not sure what she was talking
Not
about.
that much, just a tiny
a little bit. It wasn't me.
According to plan.
I've heard a rumor. I don't know. Jared, where'd you go, buddy?
So I discussed improvisation basically as a sort of universal framework for human creativity. It's something that I see as a primal instinct that everybody has. I talked about how I really kind of remember learning to improv in playtime. And then as I got older, I became a jazz singer. And then, of course, there's a lot of heavy improvisation involved in that. And then I discussed how the principles I learned there would affect me as an experienced designer and a writer later on. So basically, it was my journey to improv through the various stages of my life, and then extrapolating it as a sort of universal philosophy of how humans create and innovate.
That's cool. And I'll go last. We all overlapped a bit this month, right? On a couple of levels. One, I think, was with experience in performance, whether it's acting or as a musician, because that's kind of where I took off from. Not as much improving as a musician, because I'm not that good a musician. Turns out I think you have to be pretty skilled to be great at certain forms of improv. But for me, it's my friend Tom Kennigan used to have this saying. He said, isn't it great that the good Lord takes good care of those of us who have absolutely no idea what we're doing? And to me, improv it kind of builds on where Jerry went. Yeah, it's what we do. We species, we critters, we aggravated apes, we we are the MacGyvering species. We say, hey, look at that. What is that? That's a stick. No, it's not. It's a pirate sword. I mean, so, I kind of went there because it seems to me like everybody is improving all the time, if we were honest. So, Bob, having heard all this lunacy, what's your first take?
What I love most about this is the fact that you're hitting it from all these different directions, because I agree with Jared in that improv is DNA. And what you've done is you've shown us 4 very distinct ways to apply improv. And there's actually a whole school of improv called applied improvisation that's about not getting on stage and doing improv, but actually taking these skills and applying them to the unknown as it arrives in your lives. So, I loved Olivia's take on the concept that living is improv and that you're having to figure stuff out as you go. And it reminded me of the quote from Ricky Gervais, who said that the best advice he ever received was somebody saying to him, nobody else knows how to do any of this stuff either. And it was just so empowering. And this is the thing about improv. It is an empowering art form because you're forced to say yes. So you have to have the adventure. And since experimenting and experience, they have the same root for a reason, right? Because they come from the same God. And I feel like improv forces you into both of those worlds. So I love the different angles. I was really impressed to learn how much you all knew about improv from your own different perspectives before even stepping into this room with you. So it was really great.
Well, so that's probably a good front door let's kick this around a little bit, open it up. So, comments about what you read from other people or things Bob mentioned or stuff that's on your mind or stuff you thought about maybe after you posted your blog.
It was really interesting to read people talk about improv as music or from the point of view of musicians, because I'm not a musician. I'm a singer, but I don't know anything about instruments or that sort of thing. My take on improv has always been from the point of view of an actor and a person stumbling through life. So
an actor.
So an actor, yeah, exactly. So it was really interesting. I've never thought about jazz and improv, but obviously, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I told the story, and I think I've told some of you guys. We worked for a guy at Walt Disney World, fabulous guy, just passed away last year, named Judson Green. And Judson was a consummate jazz musician. Could have been a world-class performer if that's what he had chosen to do. He had so many other talents. He ended up running Walt Disney World, maybe better than anyone's ever done it. But he got us all together once, and he had his band on stage. We're like, oh, Judson wants to play, because he liked to play. Judson would go sit in the lobby of the Grand Floridian and just play the piano because he liked to, So we said, oh, he's going to play. Well, what he did was he turned it into a lesson on leadership and said, look, I want to talk to you about how a band works. I want to talk to you about improv. And he said the same thing Duncan said, which was, yeah, when so-and-so over here takes off on a solo, and he'd cue the guy in the saxophone would go completely nuts and, blow his mind and, and end on the tonic, right? He'd say, he can do that because we've agreed on the time signature. We've agreed on the beat. We've agreed on the melody. And we have a cultural tacit sense also. And because there is a cultural piece, right? There's an unspoken but tacitly understood thing about, yeah, we're jazz dudes. And jazz dudes know what that means, right? Well, so in my musical career, I wasn't on a jazz dude. I was an acoustic folk rock musician. But once I wrote the thing, I said, actually, we did do that. Somebody said once, hey, you guys' harmonies are really tight. Who writes that? And we're like, well, nobody writes it. I mean, we get on the stage and we sing it. They said fairly, how do you know what to sing? And we were like, how much chili do you know to put in the chili you're making? Well, I don't know. I taste it. I said, yeah, same. We know where the harmonies are because we sort of know where the harmonies are. So there's that organic piece of this. And I think, Jared, you touched on some of that thinking.
Sure. Well, I mean, for 10 years, my first job and my second favorite job now was as a jazz singer, and I performed with. Sometimes it was just me and a track, quite truthfully. And there isn't a whole lot of improvisation you can do with the track, at least so I thought. But I think I found in the spirit of jazz, it's very much you do have to have a lot of practice, a lot of skill to know what you're doing, but it's also the grounding of yourself to live in the moment, where you can, I would see somebody's facial expression as I was about to go into an instrumental break, and if they were looking happy, that would affect how I would then go into a scat solo. I would be elated, I would be happy or ecstatic, or if I saw that the room was more on a chill vibe, I would go into something that felt a little bit more, on the introspective side. And I couldn't define what happy scatting is or what introspective scatting is for you, but I could say that it was a matter of being in the moment, feeling the feelings, being on an emotional, the same emotional level as the people in the room with you who are feeding off of your energy to begin with. So I found that to be a very strong indicator. And I think a lot of other jazz musicians I've talked to about, a lot of people, I think, is particularly in the modern day, people my age too, who don't really have a familiarity with jazz, think of it as a very intellectualized, very inaccessible genre of music. But it's a very primal genre of music, and I think that the best jazz musicians are not the academics who know the theory so great. It's the guys who can close their eyes and get a sense of how the people in the room are feeling and play to those human needs that they are not expressing in words, but expressing just in the essence of their being.
I think what you said is brilliant, and I think it ties directly to what Duncan was talking about in terms of the rules, because those rules give us the safety to be in the moment and to allow things to happen. And it seems to me that what you're all talking about is the basic principle of presence. And that is really being there. I mean, whole body listening so that you experience what the other people around you are experiencing, and you're connected in a way that allows you to create something original together that blows the minds of the people around you. And like they ask, who wrote that? We get on stage and get off stage all the time and have people say, come on, you guys made that up in the back and then brought it out to us, right? And we never do at SAC, but that's a very common path to sketch writing. Talk to us, Duncan, about how those rules affected your ability to play and create in that environment.
Well, it was interesting. First of all, Jared, we need to make sure Santa brings a karaoke machine to the Ideas World office. Got to have some crooning happening. When we were writing the sketches, they came out of improv when it was just the three of us, shooting the breeze late at night, partially influenced, and just going off on a tangent somewhere. And suddenly there was some magic there. We'd start scribbling notes about what it was, and we'd come back and start to formalize that. But then when we were doing the improv, we started with rules, and then we're free to go off. And one of the impediments to us, once the improv got so good that it was actually starting to replace a lot of the sketch work in our show, was this sometimes getting lazy. Like a musician will have a lick that they like to throw into their solos in a certain key or a certain tempo, and it's in their quiver, and they pull it out, and people look forward to hearing that. But at least from a comedy standpoint, if you want to really embrace, as you were saying, the presence of the moment, then when somebody shouts out something that you've heard before and you've killed with something before, it's always very easy to be lazy and just go back to something that works. And so what we were doing is we would really push ourselves to not become complacent while we were on stage, because we were doing it so much. We just had a huge quiver of things that we could fall back on. But we always knew we had to get off with a laugh, at least to close that part of the show or whatever. So we would allow ourselves to do that. If we hadn't found a close in the moment, then we would allow ourselves, okay, let's get to a close that we know that works, because we want to keep the show going. We've been doing this for 5 or 6 minutes now. Roller coaster ride of the show. We got to move on to something here. So you got to end it big. But that laziness when you're not present, it can be really detrimental to really shortcutting what the beauty and that magical moment when it really truly is spontaneous that improvisation provides.
It reminds me of a couple of Disney stories, Walt stories. The great one is, because remember, particularly with Walt, right? He, people think of him the way they remember him in his later life. When he started the company, he was flying completely blind. Not only did he have no idea what he was doing, nobody had ever done what he was trying to do before. So there was no roadmap whatsoever. It was all improv. So the first big break they ever had was Three Little Pigs. They released this cartoon, and it was the first full Technicolor cartoon, and it was a success. It was the studio's first success. They actually made money. They could make payroll, And so once everybody sobered up, Walt's had his animators. They're all in there, and Walt comes in the next day, and they're like, "Hey boss, and we're going to pitch you some great ideas. We got some great ideas for the next Pigs movie." And he said, "Boys," because they were all men, he said, "Boys, there's not going to be a next Pigs movie." He said, "What do you mean? My God, it's the only thing we've ever done that worked." He said, "Boys, you can't top pigs with pigs." And what they did became Snow White, which was the first feature-length animated. So, the point is, to me, there's a component of improv that always says, not just yes and, but yes and maybe bigger too. How big? Improv to me, and again, I'm not an actor, but improv to me asks the question, how big can this be? How much can this be? How much more is there for us to play with or mine there?
It's a basic rule that we have, Bob, that says, if this is true, what else must be true? And we follow that rabbit hole as far as we can, and to the point of absurdity very often, which is where the comedy is found, right? So we start with a very simple premise, cats can fly. Okay, yes, cats can fly. So if that's true, what else must be true? What else, folks? If cats can fly, what else must be true?
Yeah.
I'm actually asking you guys, improvise with me.
Well,
they catch birds when they're flying.
Right, birds are at risk because cats can catch them in the air. What else is true?
Well, it's going to change the FAA. We've got new regulations we're going to have to be dealing with. We've got cats and drones in the same space. So now we've got fur flying everywhere. I hate reality just opens up a whole.
You end up in trees.
I hate to
the fur is flying everywhere. What that's going to do for people's allergies, for the people that are allergic to cats that are living on the ground, my gosh, they're going to have to go into underground bunkers.
You're missing
That's
the big
why
one.
I use Claritin Flying Cat.
What's the big one, Bob?
Cats poop, you guys. Come on. They're flying around up there.
All right.
I think I will live underground.
Kind of umbrella now.
No, it's the hat. It's the kitty litter hat fashion statement. You get the hat.
Has always worked blue. So
the big bowl of kitty litter on there, so you're good no matter what.
Well, what you all just did was you all leaped on the yes and train immediately and said, okay, here's the premise. Now let's go with it. And each one of you came up with a completely different perspective on that reality. And those different perspectives for us on stage create the scene. It's like all of a sudden we come in.
Birds.
Poor birds. My cats kill enough birds without the ability to fly. So I would really worry if they could actually fly.
So Bob, let me ask you, because that called the question for me. Have you ever had a time where you went there and the people you're working with didn't pick it up?
Oh, sure.
In other words, you throw it out there, and then everybody's like, "Wait a minute, cats are mammals. They don't fly." I was like, has that ever happened to you?
Absolutely. And the only way that you can survive that is to radically yes and those people. So It's like you yes and their confusion, you yes and the absurdity of their inability to understand what the situation is. It becomes about something different than what you were talking about. But by its very nature, improv is evolution. It has to be.
Also, you can have the ability of one of the people in whoever's having the conversation suddenly side with the audience who is not getting it, and siding with the doubters, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so now you've got tension where it's not us versus them. You suddenly scoop one person over to reflect them and represent them and defend them, and suddenly there are different channels to get into the humor from their perspective as opposed to what you were doing on stage initially.
But letting go of your agenda, right?
Oh yeah.
And this is the thing. Letting go of your agenda is one of the most critical skills you can have in any form of improv, because if you're holding on to what you want and you're not opening yourself to what other people can contribute, it's not improv. Improv is a team sport. It's not stand-up. There has to be more than one person involved for improv to happen. That's why I love it.
There's a marvelous physicist, a guy named David Bohm, one of the great American physicists. In the last half of his life, he became completely absorbed with the notion of the bridge between physics and spirituality, and he started studying Krishnamurti and all these things. But he invented this process, and it's kind of a serious version of improv. It's actually called a Bohmian dialogue. And the whole premise of a Bohmian dialogue is you cannot have an actual dialogue if anyone has an agenda. So the only way you can enter into a real dialogue is for everybody to not bring an agenda. And
So it's the
it
opposite
wasn't until I
of-
just heard you say it, I said, my God, the guy was doing improv. But he was doing improv on, what happens to the soul when it reincarnates. And by the way, how many kinds of quarks are there? And he said, the problem with science is we get trapped in our forms. And so he said, in fact, that's why we call these things discoveries. He said, that's ridiculous. We didn't discover them. They were already out there.
Yeah.
We're just learning to pick them up and run with them, Anyway, I thought that was fascinating. It's an amazing one.
Something else I would
Discovery is a good word. I think
Yeah, well, I
discovery
guess
a
it
good
is.
Yeah.
Something else I'd knock on about presence is it's not just in that split second moment of the inertia of where things are going and the firing of the neurons to keep pace, but it's also remembering what has happened, because at least from a comedic standpoint, some of the biggest laughs you can get doing improv is when you 2 or 3 minutes later reference something that came out of nowhere, but you've remembered that nugget, and throwing that call back out on an audience completes the circle for them, and you'll get a huge laugh.
So right. It's funny because when I would do solos and singing, whether it was scatting or whatever, the part that the audience always responded to was after you go into this crazy riff, and with other musicians too, is when you would tie in the bit of that core medley or melody, or to another song that's related or familiar. For me, I always went back to Blue Sky Shine at Me. I try to find a way to work in that little melody line because it's a recognizable one. Everyone works, but people go crazy when they hear something that they identify with, and that they feel smarter, they feel more a part of the moment, I guess.
So that's a key point too. You can, I always credit Kelly Pounds with saying this. She's our colleague. I don't know if she really invented it, but there's the corollary is you don't ever want to get so far out in front of your audience that they mistake you for the enemy and shoot you in the back. So that story, I was listening to Charles Lloyd. And if you don't know who Charles Lloyd is, he's one of the great living jazz masters in the United States. You've probably never heard his name, but he's behind so many of the great jazz players. Our good pal and colleague Tim Duffy was a big student of Charles Lloyd's. But I just was listening to a piece he did the other day, and it's got a huge tabla drumming solo in the middle, and it goes completely ape. It's like you can't even remember where they started. The button on the end, to your point about getting back to something the audience can grab, is after this wild solo, it's on the tablas there, it goes pump ba-da-la-dee, pump pump
Yeah,
pump.
That's probably the most famous.
And it was a live recording, and the place went completely apeshit. I mean, the place went nuts. I was also thinking about some of the masters of comedy groups. Like for me, and I'm the old guy here, but there was Monty Python, of course. Which, if you know anything about the Pythons, you know that they didn't write that stuff. That was stream of consciousness. They'd set up a framework. They'd do the characters, and then wherever it went, it went. And so among the most famous routines, the fish slapping dance, which is one of their greatest ever, there's not a single word in it. That was completely roll the camera, and we got this many seconds, and then they just came up with whack and prancing around up there.
And at the side of the lock. Yep.
Before that, there was a group which I forced Olivia to listen to several times, Firesign Theater, and they are and our good pal, who we got to work with, Peter Bergman, was one of the fire signs, and they took it to a whole other level. And maybe this is common in y'all's experience too. They didn't even like each other very much. Proctor and Bergman they didn't hang, but when they got in the studio, and I'm talking about an analog radio studio with audio tape, no digital, nothing, did all of it live. All they had was a premise, and they just went. Even the character, they made the characters up on the fly. So now there was some like Porgy Tirebiter, or some of those recurring characters. They had those in their kit bag, but. I was always amazed at how can you do this with someone you don't particularly care for. But
there has to be respect, though.
There was.
I know a lot of performers who don't hang off of the stage, who are incredible chemistry and otherwise on stage, and it really is. It's amazing to watch them transform. But it's performing. I mean, it is.
It's also the rules of the road. You can be a jerk off stage. You can even be a jerk on stage as a character jerk. But as long as you respect, we used to call it know your 16. So if you're doing a solo, you got 16 bars,
Yeah.
So know your 16, because if you get up there and start a soliloquy, we're going to bust that bubble 30 seconds later because the audience is expecting it to be busted or whatever. They want you to do something. So you either know your 16 to hand it off, to build up, or to join or conjoin with somebody, or setting up a juxtaposition where somebody's going to come in. But you gotta play nicely, I guess is a better way of phrasing it.
Or not, because we do it by bumper cars as well sometimes, right? Don't we? And
Yep.
we get to the point where they're taking their 32, and you're like, well, we're going to bust this up in the funnest way possible.
Yep.
And then you go back in the green room and you say, we agreed on these rules. You broke the rules. We broke the rules too. So let's not do that again. That's another thing I want to talk about, the post. Because we talk about being live and in the moment, right? And that's very critical to improv. But another thing that's very critical to us, especially at SAC Comedy Lab, is the post-mortem after the show. To sit down for 10 minutes and talk about what worked, what didn't work, who felt supported, who didn't feel supported, and what commitments can we make to each other so that the next time we do this, it feels better and it is better. And it's a really lovely element. It's very, self-critical. Not in a harsh way. We're kind to each other, but we tell each other the truth in that space, and even if it hurts. So, what kind of experience do you guys have with the experience of the post?
Well, I want one I can throw out right because you've all been part of it is Story Jam. So our fundamental. It's clearly not performance art for the sake of art, but I would argue it is a performance art of a kind, and we have a very specific set of objectives we got to get to, but we always post them. In fact, sometimes we on the fly them. I can't tell how many times I've walked up to Duncan right in the middle of a jam saying, you know what? Next time we do this, we need to give them more direction. They're lost. Yeah, right. Write that down. I mean, so it's kind of like continuous improvement, But I think we always debrief those. The rule for Story Jam to me is I'll quote another guy. The guy that hired me at Disney was a guy named Bob Yanni, ran entertainment. And Bob had a lot of famous quotes. But our favorite was, we never do the same thing once. I mean, and that's kind of been the motto for Story Jam. And part of that is to say, let's make this fresh. Let's not say, we might repeat an exercise because it's the right exercise. We're not going to do it the same way. And I think getting at that post-mortem or that after action report or lessons learned if you're a Marine, that's a critical part of it.
Right.
It's interesting for me because I have not done a lot of actual formalized performance improv other than improv games in theater. So most of my experience with post notes have been, okay, here's what happened in the show, and here is the notes we have on it. Or I have been doing tech and I have been saying, it would actually be a lot easier if we cut all the actors out of the show. And just had the props. And it kind of, it goes back to most of my experience with theater is more structured. When I was in middle school, they reiterated the fact that when you are performing Shakespeare, you should not, you need to speak the words exactly because of the iambic pentameter. And I performed in operas and stuff where you have to say the right things because it's in a different language and it's all this stuff. So when I go to try to perform improv, it's okay. So the idea of having a sort of post for improv is counterintuitive to me for some reason.
But I got to tell you too, and I'll bust you on this. You did a show once. It was the one where you played Edith the maid.
Yeah, Blithe Spirit. That was a lot of
Spirit.
fun.
Well, so in the middle of it, you come on stage. You got one line to deliver, and you decided to channel your inner Monty Python. So the line was, they say, just go in the kitchen and have a sandwich. And Olivia pops out with, but I don't want the sandwich.
I don't want the curtains.
Straight from Holy Grail. So,
well, I will say, I fell down a lot. I fell down 3 times when I was in Urinetown and Chicago. So that was a bit of improv that I had to deal with, standing up in huge heels. But
improv is very often sitting in it. I have a good friend, David Rosowski, who's an incredible improviser, who's worked with Stephen Colbert and Steve Carell. And I mean, really amazing. And one of his big lessons is finding comfort in discomfort and being able to sit in that discomfort, realize the limits of that discomfort, and then realize the things that you can do with that discomfort. We too often become deers in the headlight when we get uncomfortable, when we should just ease into it. Because, I mean, how many of us have spent even one day without discomfort in our lives? We should, to some extent, be used to this thing. It should be an old friend, not an intruder in our lives, right? So comfort with discomfort, I think, is one of the greatest paths to happiness in life.
That's a giant insight, and really useful. That without the discomfort, I might even argue we're not, if you're not falling down, you're not skiing hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not human.
Yeah, we're not going to get better. We're not going to make bigger, greater, more cooler, more beautiful. We're not going to do any of that unless we push. And if we push, sometimes it's like, how did I get up on this rock, and how the hell am I going to get down?
What a mood.
But that moment is, maybe that really is, the quintessential improv moment is, yipes. Okay, here we go.
I call it plot twist.
Right now, exams.
Right. If you could just adapt that so that every time that unexpected shows up in your life, you treat it like an actual plot twist. Because if you're watching a movie or you're reading a book and you hit a plot twist, you're psyched. You're like, plot twist. This is so great. But in real life, we don't go plot twist. This is so great. We go plot twist. This sucks. And we just have to...
Well, look, we can all try it. We got spring coming up, right? So this year, here's what we want everybody to do. This little piece of advice from the Ideas On team. This year at tax time, we want you to just call the IRS and say, yeah, no, just kidding. Here's what we're really going to do. Tell us how that goes. We'd love to hear, love to hear your success with that. Hey, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap, but I'd like to do this for about 4 more hours. Speaking of improv, what a blast,
Yeah.
I don't know. Is Zoomprov a thing? Maybe it is by now.
Well,
it's not. We should make it a
thing. Zoom theater is a thing that is happening. I wrote a Zoom play. It's bad.
Well,
is it a play that takes place on Zoom? Or?
Yeah, it's a play that takes place on Zoom. That's what a Zoom play is. My school's done. What?
Very cool.
Guess what? This is adaptation in process, right?
Yeah.
Before all this happened, you weren't doing playwriting for Zoom, and yet here you are improvising when the change comes and making it productive and useful. It's everywhere. I love that. That's a great example.
Well, we love you guys, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. This is new. This is fresh. This is only our 2nd episode. We're going to build up a nice library out there. It is so much fun. So lots of ways you can find us. You can find the blogs, which if you're a reader, and we love you to read them, you can find those at our website at ideas.com. Just click on the blog link, and you'll see the Ideas On blog page. You can also find the Ideas On channel on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts, we're there too. So please join us and send us notes, argue with us, yell at us, tell us we're goofy, whatever you'd like to do. We'd like to get you into the dialogue as well. And we will see you on the next one. Take it easy, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.